This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And I am so excited to have Star Wars Explain on the podcast this week to talk about Tears of the Nameless. But honestly, Tears of the Nameless and mostly other things. The High Republic, a little bit of Beware the Nameless. All kinds of Star Wars related content. I had a great time. I'm sure Alex had a great time. And I hope you have a great time listening to our conversation. Here it is. So we started talking about the High Republic and we were both like, we can't say more because we're not recording. And now we are recording. So I will ask you first of all, having finished this book and knowing that there's really not a lot of High Republic left, how are we feeling? Are we feeling okay? Are we ready?
Yeah, I think this book really helped me start to come to terms with accepting it.
Okay.
I enjoyed Temptation of the Force, but that and I feel like Beware the Nameless, which came out a couple weeks before Tears,
Mm.
it kept on introducing more stuff that
Yes.
I was like, how are you going to wrap all this up? Like we're entering the final phase here, the final wave of the final phase,
Yeah.
and I still felt like things were expanding. And like, how are we going to do this in just like three more books and some comics? And Tears of the Nameless started to show me how it's all like going to start spiraling back down. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay. It feels like it's going to be a satisfying conclusion.
Yeah. I had that exact feeling. And even back when they introduced the Blight first, and I was like, oh,
Hmm.
cool, another mystery. And then they just kept talking about it more book after book. And I was like, are we gonna wrap this up and also everything else that we've already introduced? And I was slightly worried, like not worried because they know what they're doing. They've been planning this long enough. They got it. I'm not worried about it. But also I was like, what? How does you have that moment where you're like, I know this is all going to come together, but how exactly is it going to come together? And I think actually that's a sign of a really well crafted series is like you're not supposed to know everything. You can maybe be able to predict some things, some endings, some outcomes, but to have your moment of I don't know where this is going, but I know it's going somewhere, that's a good thing.
Agreed. I'm really glad that they have always been very open about, we planned this whole thing out. We mapped out the story and the waves and the phases, so they know what story beats to hit
Yeah.
and where. But yeah, just to the reader, it seems like, oh my God, this is so chaotic, and it's absolutely meant to be.
Yeah. Exactly. Before we do more of talking about the High Republic because there's so much to say and I feel like with every High Republic book we talk about on the show, the more that the High Republic goes on, the more time in each episode we spend just talking about the High Republic in general instead of the book specifically because it just all continues to build and build and build in the best way possible. But still, but before we continue to talk about this really amazing series that is totally never going to end, and we don't need to think about a year from now when it's over. And what may or may not come after that. Why don't we talk about you for a second? Just in case there's anyone out there listening to this Star Wars podcast who's never heard of you or what you do, which I don't believe that that's possible, but you never know. Why don't you tell me about you, what you're doing here, and kind of how this whole like star
You
love of
invited me
Star Wars.
here.
I did.
What am
I
I doing
did.
here?
I invited you here and you said yes for some reason. I don't know why. I never know. Yeah, Star Wars for you. Like how did that start? Because everyone has a different story and I love hearing them.
Yeah, I believe it was in 1995, because in 1996 the Olympics were here in Atlanta, where I grew up
Oh.
and still live, and so they built like this big Olympic park and stuff, and I went down to visit it with my parents, so I would have been, I think, 8 after it was done in 1995, and I don't know why to this day, but there were people in costume walking around. I'm guessing that it was because Dragon Con was going on and it's
Mm,
not far away from that park.
okay.
So I was like, that's me rationalizing it now. But at the time, there were just people roaming the park in costumes. And one of them was Darth Vader. And I just asked my dad, like, who is that? And the guy saw me gesturing to him and came over and like did Darth Vader stuff, just tried to be intimidating and stuff. But I was like, "Who is that?" And my dad was like, "Oh, it's Darth Vader," and told me a little bit about the story. And I was like, "I have to see this." So we went home and they had the movie taped off of TBS. So we watched the non-special edition versions and fast forwarded through commercials and stuff. But that was my first Star Wars experience, and then I watched that tape until it just broke. I think I watched it like every day that summer, until they were finally like, "A, let's get the actual tapes." And then there was a good long while that they were just letting me get as much mileage out of Star Wars as I could, and they were like, "There's two more." And then I got to see The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
Amazing. I can't even imagine what that's like to be like, I love this movie. And you're like, wait, the story's not over yet. There's more.
Yeah.
And then the prequels came out and there was even more. And then now there's even more than that.
Yeah, I feel like I just got so lucky with my fandom. I was young when I saw the originals. I didn't have to wait too long for the special editions, and then that kept me going into the prequels. And just so much was happening for Star Wars right as I was diving into it.
Mm.
And I was young enough that I saw the prequels and loved them and just saw that it was more Star Wars and the internet wasn't a thing. So I didn't really hear much pushback about the prequels, except I think I remember reading a review on the newspaper and being like, I can't believe they didn't like it.
Oh no.
That was about it.
I got into Star Wars, I think it must have been 2003, 2004. And so I kind of had a similar experience where there was already a lot of Star Wars for my brain anyway. And then I watched episode one and two. And not probably too long after that, although I'm sure it felt like a very long time for me as a child. Episode three came out. But even for me, after that came out and we had 10 years of not another Star Wars movie, by that point, there were so many other ways to consume Star Wars that I really didn't miss it that much. Because you had um well, really for me it was books because
Hmm.
there weren't shows constantly on like there are now, or there wasn't Disney Plus where you could go and watch the Clone Wars from start to finish anytime you wanted to. That didn't exist, but um there were other ways to discover it, and I started reading like the Star Wars data bank, and like I tried to like learn as much as I could about everything. And um it's amazing to me all the different ways that people discover it because it's a little different for everyone. It's like, oh, my dad showed me this movie, or I saw Darth Vader randomly walking around a park one day. I love it. I love it.
The books also for me were just the second I went into this universe, and then uh eventually they let me know there were more movies, and then I was like, oh my gosh, there's books and there's video games, and like Dark Forces had come out kind of recently, so I played that with a friend. And
Mm.
but yeah, those books really, those were like the first novels that I read. I would have been in like third or fourth grade, but I was like, yeah, I'll read a 300-page book if it's Star Wars.
And I love that. And that's something I've always loved about the books is um they just offer something really for the potential for anyone to discover it. I mean, that's why I love the middle grade and the kids' books so much, is because like I discovered Star Wars through the Galaxy of Fear books. Um,
Yeah.
because like those were made for, well, I may have been like a little too old for them at the time, but like if you're a kid and you're wanting to get into Star Wars, like there are books for you. I think that's so cool. Like even if you're not into reading, like, oh, it's Star Wars, I'll give it a try. And like that could lead someone down, an entire lifetime's worth of just wanting to read more stories. I love it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think those were the first novels that I read, and then they got me into like fantasy and sci-fi
Yeah.
books. And when Lord of the Rings was getting huge, and what was that, 2000, when we were building up to the first movie,
Hmm.
then I started to get obsessive about Tolkien as well. So, but yeah, I think I mostly read Star Wars books when I was in like that elementary middle school phase.
Do you remember your first one?
I Going back, I think I've answered this with different answers before. I know I read Heir to the Empire pretty early, but I
Mm.
actually think Shadows of the Empire might have been my first one,
Your first. That's wild.
because the game was coming out,
Hmm.
and I had the book, I had the comic, and I rented the game from Blockbuster back when that was a thing. But I think after that, I started going chronological. So I believe like, as I rack my brain, I think it went like Shadows of the Empire, Truce at Bakura. I think the X-Wing books came after that. Then there was Courtship of Princess Leia. I remember building up a little bit
Mm.
to Heir to the Empire and kind of trying to stick to the timeline.
Nice. I would love to at some point go back and try to read everything chronologically. It would be an adventure, especially now, because there's so much. Um, I'll never have time for that, but you never know.
I know back in 2018, I had this idea to basically like just reread through Legends as if it were coming out now. So
Oh
kind of read it
man.
in release order. And I read Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and then just so much new Star Wars stuff is coming out that's
Hmm.
already like hard to keep up with. So I don't know, maybe someday I will tackle that again.
I've for a long time I've wanted to do um a podcast series where we just read legends from start to finish. And I would love to do it, but also like there's so many new Star Wars books coming out every year. There's not time to read. Like I
Yeah.
reread or I reread or I go back and I read like Legends books I haven't read yet as often as I can. But there's not as much time as I would like. Like if we could just read Star Wars books all day, that would be great. But you know, there's too much else to do.
I just need to practice my speed reading. That's what I need to
I
do.
I Me too. Me too. Um, so you discovered Star Wars and you started reading all these things and you really fell in love with it, which I love. And that's part of the reason that you're here. Eventually, Star Wars Explained happened, and I don't actually know the story behind how that happened. So I'm very curious about the origins of that.
Well, I've always just kind of loved the minutia of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved trivia, and not like, eh, so we'll bring it back to Star Wars books some more, but my friend who lived down the street from me also was reading through the books. He was getting into Star Wars at the same time. So we basically had like a book club on the bus where we'd go
Oh.
home and we would say like, all right, we're going to read chapters like 1 through 5 tonight and we'll talk about it tomorrow. But that just like turned into us buying the different essential guides or encyclopedias, and we would just be on the bus and be like, did you know Boba Fett's real name is Jaster Muriel, which isn't true anymore, but like we would just it was just a constant stream of like, did you know? And like we'd be like, oh my God, that's so cool. So I've always loved trivia. Um, at Dragon Con, the convention I mentioned earlier, we started going to that in 2009, and it now it's my favorite time of year. It's just a wonderful place, but they have a very, very difficult trivia competition there.
Mhm.
And I was like, I know Star Wars trivia. I'll compete in this. And I got into the top 10. I think the first year I did it, I was like top five. And then every year after that for a while, I was like number 7 or 8. And I was like, okay, if I just studied a little bit, I could probably win this thing.
Mm.
And I was also at that time working at like a digital marketing agency, doing video marketing specifically. So I was like, I have the know-how. I know how to edit. I know
Mm.
how to run a YouTube channel. And I was subscribed to YouTubers, Star Wars YouTubers, but a lot of their lore videos were just really, really long. And
Mhm.
I was like, I need to cast like a wider net and not go as deep. I just need to like refamiliarize myself with a lot of stuff. And so I started doing just very quick, bite-sized videos. And I was like, I'm just going to test this out and make some videos, put it on a YouTube channel, and see what happens. And I think my initial idea was I basically made 150 videos before doing anything else. And I was like, I'm just going to schedule these and then see what happens. And they'll come out over the course of a year and I'll see what happens. And I wasn't really going to look at it. But very quickly, people responded to it and started to subscribe. And I was like, oh no, all the most of those videos I made are just not good enough. So I scrapped probably like 140 videos
No, no.
and started over. But yeah, it got a reaction very quickly. And so I was like, okay, I will just do my studying here.
That is so cool. A perfect way to study, really, because you're like having fun.
Hmm.
But also it's Star Wars and you're learning things. And you might win some trivia.
That's what people ask me how to study for trivia, and I'm like, there's not really a better way than doing a YouTube channel because you have to do your research and then you
Hmm.
have to write a script and then you have to read the script and then you have to listen to it while you edit it again. And by the time you've uploaded the video, I'm like, it's really in there.
Yeah. When I first started thinking about doing a books podcast, I was kind of like, I've read a lot of Star Wars books, but I don't feel like I know enough about them. So I just started writing about them because if I was
Mm.
writing about them, I had to look things up. I had to know things. I had to know the histories. I had to know how things connected. And look at us now. Um, all right. Let's talk about the High Republic. Because it is so fascinating to me to even before it's done to already look back at its entire journey and that first announcement of like Project Luminous, and we don't really know what this is, but we have predictions, and um then figuring out like the High Republic was going to be this whole book series unlike anything they'd ever done, and there's going to be books for adults and books for kids, and of course now there's been a show that's set in the High Republic, and to have watched not only its evolution, but how successful and like well received it's been by so many people. Um, I love it. It's amazing. And yeah, I'm curious to hear more about kind of like what you thought like going into this whole thing and kind of like how you're feeling now, kind of running into like this last wave.
Yeah, I was really excited, even from the Project Luminous announcement, just to know that we were going to get like a big publishing initiative.
Hmm.
Because yeah, I've had such a deep love for Star Wars books for a long time, and some of my favorites are the X-Wing books, and having just this ongoing series of
Hmm.
characters. Or I know this is more controversial, but I really liked the New Jedi Order. I like the Yuuzhan Vong. So just having that really long story that played out over several books, I missed that in
Mm.
the new canon because we got like the Alphabet Squadron trilogy, which I adore, but a lot of it was more just it's Tarkin, it's Phasma, it's
Mm.
Thrawn, and not that those stories aren't good, but I just wanted the books to be able to do more. And
Yeah.
I still understand why, because back in the 90s, the books and the comics were how the story continued. So they got to do these big, huge, epic, ongoing stories,
Mm.
whereas they reset the canon and it felt like the books were all just supporting material. Like
Mm.
Last Jedi's coming out. Let's do a book about Phasma. And Star Wars Rebels, Thrawn is in it, so let's kind of fill in between seasons what Thrawn got up to, but Rebels is still like the main driving force of the story. So like I understood all that, but I just wanted the books to have something that felt a little bigger, felt like they were their own thing. So I was already psyched by any publishing initiative like that. Um, then they announced what it was and where it was in the timeline. I was like, oh, great. They really haven't touched this much, even in Star Wars Legends. So it felt like it could really just do whatever. Uh, then the whole what Jedi Knights of the Round Table, I guess they described it as,
Mm.
and it was going to lean a little more fantasy, which I love sci-fi, but I love space fantasy more. So I was
Mhm.
like, it's just lining up to what I want it to be. So yeah, the concept alone had me excited, and then I remember reading Light of the Jedi and being like, oh my God, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, and that now I just hope it's good. And Light of the Jedi blew me away. I remember I was gonna just I got it like late at night, and I was like, I should go to sleep, but I just want to read like a chapter. And then I read a third of the book and stayed up way too late and had to put it down and get some sleep. So the first two waves especially, I feel like just hooked me so well. The
Mm.
Rising Storm as well. So like I very quickly was like, I don't care how the rest of it goes. I am all in. I'm gonna devour every single story. And I haven't loved all of them, but it just feels like a microcosm of Star Wars to me because
Mhm.
I just like the universe. I like spending time there. And so that's why I will read everything and give it a shot. And it's not always what I want, but it was still fun for Star Wars. It was fun for me to spend more time in the universe. And the High Republic
Mm.
feels like a little subsection of that to be like, now anything in the High Republic, like I'm going to give it a go no
Yeah.
matter what.
Yeah. It's hard sometimes when people are asking me like, do you like what's the High Republic like? Do I have to read everything? And I'm always like, you don't have to read everything. Like it's designed so that you can read just the adult novels or you can, skip this or that. Like you'll be okay. Like if you don't read the comics, they kind of fill you in on key details like when they need to. But I'm also like, but try it. I didn't really read a lot of comics before the High Republic, and I haven't read all of the High Republic comics, but I'm trying to, with this last phase, keep up with everything. And like, I'm finding that having read all the stories that have come out in this phase so far, I'm enjoying it even more than I was before. And it's like, you can skip things. You don't have to read everything. And I'm never going to tell someone they have to read everything because then it's homework and that's not fun.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm always like, but you should try it. Like you never know. Like you've never read a middle grade before. Like give it a go because a test of courage is amazing. So you just never know. I love how the High Republic is so much now at this point that like there may, like you said, be things that are not necessarily for you, but there's also probably going to be things that are for you because it's all so different. And that's something so cool, I think, about bringing in all these different authors and not even that, but like adding new authors as they've gone on. So bringing more people in to tell different stories. You have, everyone passing characters back and forth and stories are connecting and things like that, but everyone is kind of bringing their own voice to it and their own writing style to it. And it's like it's all connected, but it's all so different in like a good way that there is, I think, something that everyone can enjoy. That's the hope anyway.
Yeah, and I'm exactly like you when it comes to Star Wars or the High Republic, is that I like to try it all or at least experience it all once and have it in my head
Mhm.
because I feel so rewarded when I do that. And uh, some character pops up, or like even between High Republic and other things, like Aslan Rel just popped up in the main Star Wars comic, and I was like, this
Mhm.
is sick. So it's like you don't have to know that stuff, but when you do invest that time, uh, I like that feeling of being rewarded. Or
Yeah.
like you don't have to know who Cobb Vanth is to understand the Mandalorian, but
Yeah.
man, when they did that, I was like, he's now one of my favorite characters just because of what he represents.
Yeah. No, I love when that happens because it is kind of like no one is ever saying that like you have to read the books or you have to do homework to understand this or that. But there are little things for the people who do, consume everything because it's designed in a lot of cases where if you don't get it, if you don't get that connection, it kind of just goes over your head and you don't really miss anything.
Hmm.
But if you do get it, you just have this smile on your face and you're like, yeah, they just mentioned the great disaster in The Acolyte, and that was cool.
Yeah, there's stuff that I mean, I've read all the High Republic books and comics, and I will still miss stuff and see it on the subreddit or something and be like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah!" Like it's still gonna go over your head,
Yeah.
but I think it and not homework, but there are definitely people who kind of view it like that, and
Yeah.
them I'm like, then probably don't do this because
Yeah.
if you're gonna go into it with a bad attitude, like it should be fun. Fandom should always
Exactly.
be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I'm like, I'll encourage people to do it. I'll guide you toward doing things. But never am I going to say you have to read this.
Right.
There are, of course, exceptions to that. Like, don't, I don't like, don't start reading the High Republic at phase three because you're not going to understand what's
For
going
sure,
on.
yeah.
But
I said exactly that on my Tears of the Nameless review. I was like, I loved this book. It should not be your first High
no,
Republic book.
no. Oh, I can't imagine starting with Tears of the Nameless. And you're like, who's this? What are we doing here? Who are the Nameless? Why do they have so
Yeah.
many different names, even though they're the Nameless? Um, with that, I mean, let's start talking about this book specifically. First of all, welcome back, George Mann. You hurt me again. Great work. I I've loved his Star Wars stuff forever. Um, and so when he did his first novel in it last year, I was so excited because I'm like, it's gonna be dark. It's going to be a lot. It's going to make me think too hard, and I'm ready. And it did all of those things and more. So we knew going into this book that it was going to be very similar circumstances. And it was. He's just so good at writing about really tough things while also being hopeful at the same time, which that's a lot of Star Wars, but it's not an easy thing to do.
There were so many just passages that I highlighted that I was like, I'm feeling all of this. And like I don't have a man, Wreath is one of my favorite High Republic characters, so
Mhm.
I had that going for me already, but just what he was going through, feeling like the weight of the galaxy is on his shoulders. I was like, this
Yeah.
poor kid, but like I see myself so much in him and everything that he was dealing with. I was just like, I'm gonna highlight this whole book.
He went through it in this book. I felt so bad for him. Because not only is he like he's trying to like solve this mystery that could like save the galaxy essentially. But then his master, former master, just shows up and he's like, "Hey,
Mhm.
what's up?" And then he has to be like, "I don't like that you're here, but I think I kind of need you, so I need to like maybe get over that, even though I'm not over it." Um, and then my favorite thing that ever happens in Star Wars happens, which it just starts getting really weird when he starts having visions, and I'm like, "This is
Oh
I'm here
yeah.
for this." Because that's I had this moment where I'm like, "Oh, it's doing the Rebels thing," where like in Rebel season 4 when um the Lothals show up, I was like,
Mhm.
this is peak Star Wars to me because like I have no idea what's happening and it's wonderful. And that happened with this book too. Um, because he's under so much pressure to figure this out. And he's like, I can do this myself, but also maybe I can ask um this former Jedi that maybe I shouldn't be spending so much time with. Um,
Yeah, the
um,
the the devil on his shoulder with
oh
Aslan
yeah,
and Comac and basically every other character
yeah,
being
yeah,
the angel.
yeah.
Um,
Oh,
oh, but yeah, those visions. I love a good Star Wars vision, and I'm obsessed with the Sith shrine that's underneath the temple.
yeah,
So, like all of that was rad.
it was. Um, let's talk about Aslan. Because this guy just keeps showing up, man. And I don't know. He's one of those characters where um you want like it's hard because you want to like maybe trust him a little bit, but you're also like, but I can't do that. But that's exactly what the characters are going through.
I love Aslan. I wish he were in phase two just a little bit more.
Yeah,
Like his story was kind of spread out over a bunch of different stuff. That it felt almost like you have to read everything to fully understand who he is and what he's going through. But
right.
him popping up in Shadows of Starlight
Yeah.
was so rad. And I'm I hope he makes it all the way to the end and then dies. I'm okay if he dies, but like I as much Aslan FaceTime as I can get.
I just um I mean, it's hard to like because you really never know, especially with the High Republic, who's going to survive and who's not going to survive because you have these moments where like we know that they're not afraid to just just get rid of whoever for the sake of the story. They've done it plenty of times. And sometimes like in this book, for example, they just do it to you and you're like you're so immersed in the story and you're like everything's going to be fine. And then this poor Padawan joins the ranks of my master is gone now. I don't know what to do, which how dare they do that again? Um, so you never know who's gonna make it. Except for like Ember is gonna be fine, obviously.
Yeah,
And Geode is safe, for sure. But uh mm,
that
it's
was early on in this book. They kept introducing it was Zaf and his master.
mhm.
I was immediately like, you two are way too likable and way too badass at what you're doing. That this won't end well. And I'm honestly shocked one of them made it out. Um, we knew who Amadeo and Miro were previously, but
Mm,
man, I was worried for them the whole time. And still, this book made them so likable right from the
yeah,
start. I
right.
was like, this is just gonna end horribly. And both Zaf and Miro, like two of the most horrifying huskings we've seen or had to
Hmm.
not even seen, just had it described to us. I was like,
Yeah.
George, cool it.
George, how dare you? Um it's you always you I have these moments where I'm like, there's no way that the High Republic could possibly get any worse. Um, like, everything there has to be hope somewhere at the end, right? And we are at the end of the second to last wave in this book. And I'm like, okay, like things are gonna start maybe getting a little better. And George Mann came in and he was like, but what if I take this character and I just hurt your feelings a little bit more?
I do think
Um,
we're used to. I like
yeah.
maybe we're jaded at this point. That's I don't think I'm ever going to forget finishing The Rising Storm
Oh
and
no.
just I had it on the Kindle, so it had that little marker down at the end where it's like 5 minutes left in this book,
Oh no.
4 minutes, and I was just like, come on, come on, come on, like you'll be fine, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. 1 minute left, and then like heartache. I just that little countdown was so visceral.
No. Yeah, because they really got you right at the end. They're like, "Oh,
Mm,
it's probably going to be fine." No, just
yeah,
kidding. And also, the worst thing about that was like, um, that story ended, and I think we got Out of the Shadows not too long after that, but like there was a big gap after that.
yeah.
So like we were just sitting here going like, not only has this just happened, but we have to sit with it for months because the Fallen Star didn't come out until like I think January of the next year,
Yeah.
and that was a long time.
I remember that too, and being Fallen Star and Book of Boba Fett were coming out like next to each other,
Oh
and I
yeah.
was like, I'm more excited for Fallen Star. Like, I want to know what's going to happen next.
I just I every I try not to like build it up too much in my head because I'm like, oh, there could be like a High Republic book that you don't love as much. But especially like in this last wave, every single one has been a hit for me just because I think even the stories that are like a little bit smaller and maybe don't have as big of an impact on the galaxy as a whole, like they're so character driven in a way that just builds out the world even more because you get these stories, especially in the middle grade books, a lot of times of just these young characters just trying to figure out like what they're doing here. And there are all these terrible things happening around them because in the middle grade books, it's the same events, but you're just seeing it through the eyes of younger characters. And it almost makes it even more heartbreaking because you're like,
Yeah.
they'll talk in the middle grade books about how, like, oh, my master became one with the force and it's fine. And I'm like, you're grieving and you don't even know what that means.
I mean, yeah, I know this is a Tears of the Nameless podcast, but yeah, Beware the Nameless, I do love that they were basically taking place at the same time,
Yeah.
referencing Ram's mission in the midst of Wreath and Amadeus. But
Yeah.
yeah, like again, we had another husking in Beware the Nameless, and uh that was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But also it gave us Churro the Hutt, and he's
Oh,
just one of my new favorites.
we are here to talk about Tears of the Nameless, but we do need to acknowledge that Churro the Hutt is probably I honestly one of the best characters that has come out of the High Republic. Um, and I know there are a lot of good characters, but there is something about Churro that's like, if we do not get more stories with Churro at some point somehow, I'm going to be writing some letters
Yeah, he's a
because
Hutt and he can live for hundreds of years.
yeah,
He can pop up in the Ray movie. Like, we don't know.
I mean, you really do never know. But yeah, there's just a lot of good things, a lot of terrible, you know, things are happening in these stories, but they're so good because you know that somehow, despite all of this, it's going to end on some kind of hopeful note, question mark. We don't know that for sure, but I mean, also, it has to end with some kind of hope because it's Star Wars and they've been dragging this out, and I say that lovingly, for a very long time.
It's
Um,
been what, coming up on 4 years
yeah.
since it started. And honestly, like my maybe biggest criticism of the entire High Republic is that I could have probably used one more wave in each
Yeah.
phase. I'm
Yeah.
like, it could have been even longer. I would not have complained.
No.
But I
Yeah.
respect how quickly it's paced.
Yeah, it's hard because like you want to say like we could have gotten more, but then you think of like all the work that went into like
Hmm.
the authors, everything's planned out. They have this, skeleton of an outline and things like that, but like them like coordinating with each other and being like, I'm gonna send you this and you tell me like, what's going on with this. And I can't imagine like I love all of these authors so much and I admire all the work that they've done. But I really hope that they get a little bit of a break when this is all over because
Yeah.
like it's been for like I'm thinking of like Kevin Scott, like it's been nonstop.
Oh yeah. I don't know when that guy sleeps.
I don't know. I don't know.
And that's just his Star Wars work. Like
Yeah.
they all write outside of Star
Yeah,
Wars
they
too. And I'm
do.
like, what are you doing?
Yeah. It's so it's so impressive and there'll be a lot more time and context for like reflecting on all of this and like I can't wait to um hear them all get to like reflect when it's all done and talk about all of this and like being able to talk about the story and not having to like say things without saying things, which is what they've been doing this whole time because they know
Yeah.
how it ends and we don't. They've known all these things and we don't. And I'm sure there've been surprises along the way, but still, it's a lot. I think like this is all going to end and we're all going to just look back and be like, it all makes sense that it ended that way. But not I couldn't predict how it's going to end. I don't really want to think about it that hard because
No, I don't either.
yeah, I mean, I want to be surprised. I don't think I could even predict if I tried. Because like there's gonna be those twists that you're not expecting, which is a good thing for sure.
Yeah, I feel like I have a high level. Just we've seen how the Republic and the Jedi have kind of started to mesh a little
Hmm.
bit more, and
Yeah.
I think we'll be able to point at everything the Jedi have been through and see how they're going to start to change into how we know them in the prequels. But
Mm.
as far as like which character lives and which dies and what exactly are the nameless, how are we going to find Planet X and like all those plot questions, I'm like no clue, and I'm not even going to try to figure it out.
Yeah, I always try to remind myself like you like stories, but you're not the storyteller of this particular series. So it's not your job to know how it's gonna end. Yeah, I guess we'll see. We still got time. Still got time. We got some comics. We have the audio drama. We have three more books. Um,
I think we got one more manga.
yes.
Trying to think of everything else that,
Yeah,
and they'll probably surprise us with something.
probably. I would love another Tales of Light and Life anthology
Yeah,
where they
yeah.
all do a story. That was so cool. I love how we're talking about everything except the book, but listen, it's fine. Because like I said, the High Republic has become so expansive and there's so many interesting things. And like every time I invite someone on the show to talk about a High Republic book, we just end up like going on and on and on about how great the High Republic is because how could you not love it? I know there are people that don't love it, but we love it. And that's why we're here talking about it. Um, I really, because you mentioned this before, how you really feel like this book um moved things forward in a way that like we weren't super sure like how things were maybe going to start wrapping up, but this book really kind of took those questions and was like, okay, what if we kind of figured this out? What if we figure out maybe how we're going to solve the nameless problem, which like um that I think has been something that's really fascinating to me is like all these pieces we've gotten throughout these different phases of like we went from we don't even know um what's happening to these Jedi. We don't even know what's causing this to. Oh, these are the nameless creatures. They're from here. This maybe is what happened to them. And this is maybe how we get them to go back forever. I love it. I'm terrified because even though maybe there's this plan of how we might fix this, what if it doesn't work? That's what I'm scared of. It's like what if Wreath is like maybe figured it out, but they try it and like for some reason it doesn't work, and then what do you do?
It'll almost certainly not work right away. And the way that they found out all that stuff, like I'm such a sucker for ancient
Yeah.
history stuff in Star Wars, like all the learning about the Ptolemites and trying to find their original world and the library they left behind. I also love Indiana Jones, so I'm like, yeah,
Hmm.
just if we do another Tales of Light and Life, please give me what Comac did on his own. Like I
Oh
want to
yeah.
see him in between Midnight Horizon and Tears of the Nameless because
Yeah.
I just want to see that adventure.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, even if like the High Republic finishes next year and they don't do more High Republic for a while, I really hope that at some point they do revisit some of these like gaps in the story that we don't have. Like they're not, you don't need them. They're not like necessary to like tell this
Right.
particular ongoing story that they're telling. But it would be so interesting to go back and be like, oh, this character that you didn't see for a while, here's what they were doing. And there's so many different ways they could do that. And I hope they do because especially um because of how many characters they introduced. I mean, so many new
Yeah.
characters. It's
That's
there's
something even like phase three, I've been like, wow, you're really like still introducing people.
yeah.
Like it's getting to be a lot.
It's so much. And I bet we'll continue to meet new people, but that just means that like there's like so many new stories they could tell or find creative ways to bring people back or introduce more Wookiees so that they can just like show up in later stories because that's a really easy thing to do. Um, did you read the Kilnaka one shot, by the way?
Hmm.
Fantastic. I loved it.
I was really surprised by it. Comics usually don't, I don't know what it is about them that I
Hmm.
don't get into them the same way I
Yeah,
do with novels or books at all, but occasionally, and it's usually Cavan Scott or Charles
yeah,
Soule, like they write some bangers, and a one shot especially, I'm like, it just doesn't seem like enough time for me to build a connection. But yeah, I was shocked at how emotional that
yeah,
comic was.
yeah. And that just proves that like they can maybe do that every once in a while. Give us a one shot, give us like some short stories. Like we don't need obviously an entirely new High Republic series of more High Republic books, but like to sprinkle in kind of like they do with like in canon books in general, they're jumping all over the timeline. Like give us a High Republic story every once in a while. Throw
Hmm.
it into the rotation. Why not?
I can't imagine they would just stop. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be the focus of publishing after 2025,
Hmm.
but I can't imagine we would never get another story about whoever lives.
Yeah.
Hopefully, okay, my big hope is that Kai Brightstar becomes Bell Zettifar's Padawan because
Oh,
those episodes between them of Young Jedi Adventures are
yeah.
just the cutest. So I'm like, all right, Bell has to live
Yeah.
so that he can take Kai as his Padawan.
I think Belle is safe. I think I say that and maybe I'm wrong, but
I mean, they've done a good job of making me think that no one is safe, but yeah, I'm hopeful.
yeah, that's all we got really at this point is hoping that at least a few of our favorites will survive. But I'm also like I'm putting my guard up at the same time. I'm like, when we get to Trials of the Jedi, I don't trust Charles Soule. I absolutely do not trust him at all. Like I feel like every chapter is going to be tragedy. And you know what? Maybe that's okay. And once again, I could be wrong. I didn't write the story. I don't know.
I mean, he's compared it to the opening part of Light of the Jedi, but it's just that the whole book. And I'm like, oh God.
No. I mean, we also asked for this. Like, they gave us one book and we loved it so much that, I mean, look at where we are now. But
I mean, yeah, they want us to feel and react, and
yeah.
that's when we were in London for Celebration. we bumped into a bunch of the writers, and Molly yelled at them for making us not know whether Burry was alive for over a year. And
No.
Charles, his reaction to that was to dance. Like he was just happy that we were upset.
Well, I think like
He,
it's just you want as a writer people to feel emotional.
Mhm.
I think have they gone a little too far? I can't say. I'm just one person, but I think
I'm
it's
trying to. They haven't done anything too far for me. I mean, like I was real upset about Loden, but
yeah,
also like yeah, that giving me that story moment that I'm never gonna forget. I'm like, thank you for that.
yeah. I mean, it's the things you remember. Like they're not always going to be good things, but you remember where you were when you read it
Hmm.
and how you felt.
And I remember my wife hadn't read it yet because I hog the book and then give it to but I just had to talk to someone about it, and I was trying to be so not I didn't give away any spoilers, but I was just like word vomiting feelings. We were like walking our dog around the neighborhood, and I was like, I just have to talk to you about this.
I always read Star Wars books before my husband gets to them, and I will highlight things in my like Kindle app when I'm reading them. I'm like, you're gonna like this. You're gonna love this. You're gonna text
That's
me
a good
about
idea.
this. And I don't say anything, but I'm just waiting. I'm like, I'm gonna text about that whenever you're reading it.
I like
Um,
that.
it's really hard to like read a book like this and not be able to say anything. I'm like, because we talk about Star Wars all the time, just walking the dog or whatever. And I'm like, there's this moment in this book that I know you're gonna want to talk about, and I can't say anything.
Which moment?
Um, it could be anything.
Oh, I thought you meant specifically from Tears.
I think there was one. Can I remember it fast enough to still make this podcast entertaining while I'm thinking about it?
I'll tell you the moment of that I was like, I
Mhm.
gotta talk to someone about this was Miro and that
Yeah.
final like look. I was like,
Yeah.
why would you write it this way?
Why would you write it this way? Oh, yeah, I've been thinking about that moment a lot. I mean, I finished the book. Was it? Yeah, it was last week because I wanted to get my review out, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna like power through this book. Like, I read it faster than I wanted to. It's a whole thing, but I did get to like the last 100 pages, and I'm like, oh, now you've hooked me enough where I absolutely cannot stop, even if I would have wanted to, because people are not safe, and I need to make sure they're gonna be okay.
Yeah,
Some of them were, many of them were not.
man, I really liked how like snappy these chapters were too.
Yeah,
I like opening up a book and seeing it's got like 60 chapters. I'm like,
yes.
yes.
The High Republic has been very good at that. I don't
Yeah.
remember how many Light of the Jedi has, but it's a lot. And I remember reading that chapter number, and I'm like, that feels like too many. But then the way that it's set up, especially that book, you get through the first 8 chapters, and you're like, oh, I understand now what we're doing
It
here.
just keeps you going so
Yeah,
quickly because it'll give you like a Wreath chapter, and that like those are always exciting to me. And then I mean each character is exciting, but then you want to get back to what well Wreath kind of ended on a cliffhanger and I want to see what happens next.
yeah,
But every chapter ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. And then
right.
if occasionally a Vernestra chapter would pop up and I was like, "Oh, hell yes," because I was like
Yeah,
so into the there's a spy in the Jedi temple plot line.
yes.
That was awesome.
I loved her in this book, and I
Me too.
loved how she wasn't in it a ton, which could have been like, a thing that was like, well, why is she in it? Why is she not in it as much? But the way that she's written in, where like her stuff is like, it's not a lot, but it's so important and so interesting that I'm like, you inserted her perfectly into the story somehow. After getting her as the focus of the last YA book, being able to like still have her in there and make her stuff really, really, really interesting. The whole spy thing was like I was reading a little bit faster just so I could get back to her story because I'm like, what is happening? And her character is so much more interesting to me now, even more so than it was because of where we've seen her now in the Acolyte. I'm like, I want to know more about how your character gets to this point. And obviously, we're not going to get all the answers, and that's fine. That's a lot of time between the end and the start of that. But still, um, it's
And I do feel
good.
like Tears did a bit of that. I was
Yeah,
like, I can start to see her being a little bit cagey
yeah,
with some other members of the order.
yeah.
And I loved like Aslan kind of prodding her, being like, you gonna ever tell them about your secret? And
I
I was
love
like,
that.
yeah, is she?
Yeah, right. And like the timing of that, like being able to like release this book after we get all the Acolyte stuff, and like now if when there are small hints of like this is maybe how she's going to turn out in the future, like you catch them now. And like I wonder how many more of those we missed before that we can then go back and find. I've wanted to reread the entire High Republic from
Yeah.
start to like up to like the last couple books before all of it ends. And I know that I can't do that. There's not enough time for that, but I wish I could. At some point, book by book, I'd like to go back and reread because like I think the reread value of this series is going to be off the charts because
Yeah, I think so too.
they've known things from the beginning and like they can plant seeds and put in little details that we just don't pay attention to because we don't know anything about the future of the story. But when we get now that we're this far, I did reread Light of the Jedi not that long ago, but I need to reread it again. It's like the little things that we didn't notice before that we're going to now. I can't wait for that. And I think for an entire Star Wars book series to be able to do that it makes it even more amazing that they were able to do that.
And not just the High Republic, but I was revisiting Master and Apprentice after Tears of the
Mm.
Nameless just to go back to that prophecy that talks about the sin of the Nameless
Ah,
and be like, all right, there might be more to mine here now that we've read Tears. And I think there was, but just,
okay.
yeah, going back to even that or Dooku Jedi Lost
Yeah.
stories that they were planting seeds about the High Republic before it came out or was even announced. I'm like, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard about Dooku having a lot of things in it, and I haven't gone back to re-listen to it or reread it yet. But I can't wait to because like that's the kind of thing where I'm like, you knew exactly what you were doing, and it's not fair. But also now we're gonna go back and reread it and be talking about it again. And then you don't have to promote things ever again because it's just gonna keep coming back and back and back. It's so I just I need I need the authors to all get together and just have an hours long conversation that we all get to sit in on, like, tape it or something, and just talk about freely, like this entire thing and how you put it together and all of that, because I would pay for that. Put it on Disney Plus. I don't know.
Oh yeah, like if they did something like the gallery for the
Yes.
Mandalorian, but just did it for the High Republic,
Oh,
just a big long
oh,
making of would be so cool.
I need it. I need it. We all need it. Because you get, in interviews and things like that, you get snippets of like them talking about things, but like tell us everything when it's all over. That's what I need.
Yeah.
Like don't hold anything back. Okay, maybe some things, but maybe.
Yeah.
I mean,
If they could show us kind of here's where we planted
yes.
this that paid off over here, yeah, that'd be neat.
Yes. And I know all of them are totally listening to this episode, so now they know that this is what they need to do. That's absolutely not true, but what if it was? Um, this is a really, really good book. And I've said that about a lot of High Republic books in the past, but I really think at this point, they're really not holding anything back. It's really like, here's the beginning of the end. Um, and while still being able to introduce new people and some new things, while also saying like, hey, this is now where we're going. And that's a hard thing to do in a book that is this late in the series, but you still have character growth. Reith, especially in this book, goes from like, I am never going to forgive this man ever to, okay,
Hmm.
maybe like we're going to be fine. That, perfect. So emotional. So, like, even this late in the series, you have these characters who are um, just growing so much. And there's still more stories. We still got more time, but I think um this is really them saying like, hey, like buckle up. Like we get a little bit of a break now, but get ready because this last handful of stories is gonna be a lot.
Yeah, I can't imagine that they're going to slow down at all with only three
No,
books left.
no. I cannot wait. This has been so fun. And I love one of my favorite things ever is to talk to High Republic fellow fans about how amazing it is because it is. And I know everyone is talking about it because it is so great, but to be able to sit down and have just, an hour long conversation about how cool everything is, that's why we're here because we're Star Wars fans and we just like books and stories and seeing how everything connects and fits together and finding all those little details that we maybe missed before, but make a little bit more sense now. It's the best thing ever.
I'm going to miss it. But
Mm.
I I'll always be super grateful for the High Republic. I also hope that they kind of use it as a template to do it again and just like get another group of five or however many authors, let them all brainstorm their own pitch and just do this again. I would love if the High Republic became like a template for publishing moving forward.
Me too. If they're not doing, let's just be optimistic. When they do another, big series like this, they've learned so much. Like even from
Hmm.
the beginning of this to now, they've, adjusted the release schedule a little bit. It's they've learned so much, and I think there's so much value in that, and there's so much more to learn. But look at what they've done now, and they can use that to kind of be like, okay, we can do something similar, or we can try this, or maybe this will work. And a little experimentation is never a bad thing because no one knew how the High Republic was going to do, and it's so successful that it's going to be um heartbreaking, but also amazing when it ends.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss it a lot.
Me too. Before we go, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you and all the things that you're doing on the internet if they want to learn more about Star Wars and all the things.
Yeah, our main spot is on YouTube. Our channel is called Star Wars Explained, and yeah, we keep up with all of the books and comics and TV shows, of course, like everything that comes out. Try to stay on top of it and talk about it. Um, find little Easter eggs or whatever, and connect all the dots that we can, and just have fun with Star Wars.
We love that. Star Wars, first and foremost, should always be fun.
Unless it's the end of the Rising Storm.
Yeah, there are exceptions, of course. Kevin Scott, you know
How
what you
dare
did.
you?
Thank you so much for doing this. This is so fun. And you'll have to come back and we'll talk more about the High Republic and maybe actually talk more about the book.
Or we could do like a big wrap up when it's all done,
I would love that. Let's do it.
since we would diverge anyway.
Yeah. Good idea.
But yeah, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. Again, like you said, just great to sit and talk for an hour about like this one specific corner of Star Wars and how much we love it.
Absolutely. It was great. Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Montum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on Substack and Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. There are so many ways you can support the show, and all of those ways are linked in the show description. The newest way is to become a member of our Patreon. For $1 a month, you can get access to an exclusive show and a sticker. And if we get 500 people to support the Patreon per month, I can hire an editor. That would be great for me, and maybe for you too. So if you'd like to support the show with just $1 a month, you can do it that way. Or you can just keep listening and sharing the episodes. That is also helpful, and I appreciate it. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.